GOAT, the guy who made time for this to happen, Connor Rogers, both of NBC Sports, Fantasy Football Happy Hour, and PFF. You work for the Jets too, right? You do the pre and post game for them still?
That's right, guys. Pre and post game for the Jets. Going to be a pretty wild year, for better or worse, this season.
Yeah, I think it's going to be for better. I'm pretty high on the Jets this year. I think
number 3 in my power rankings this year.
Yeah, I'm not that high on them.
I'm that. Actually, where are they for you? What are your expectations this year for the Jets? Let's start with that.
Listen, it's so funny to watch everybody kind of go all the way one direction, which is that they have to make the Super Bowl to justify all these expectations and acquisitions of Rodgers and everything. And then the other side of it, everybody's like, this will blow up in their face. And for me, it's just somewhere in the middle. I think this is a team that wins 10 or 11 games, finally breaks a playoff streak. Them and the Buffalo Sabres have the longest playoff drought out of the 4 major sports. So that's a really big thing to get off their shoulders that, is not a good look for the Jets, and they want to buck that trend. They want to get back into the playoffs. They have the defense and now the quarterback that you could always scare somebody in the playoffs. Maybe they surprise somebody. So I think it's somewhere in the middle, and fortunately for the Jets, it feels like Rodgers is committed beyond this year where they can actually build within this window. It's not expected to be a one and done. So I'm excited to watch it play out. But I do think the defense and the run game that they'll have give them a better floor than a lot of the people that are betting against them are saying.
Yeah, I agree. I think adding Dalvin Cook was big for them. I'm a fan of Breece Hall, and obviously you have the former offensive and defensive rookie of the year on the team that's going to help you out. But tomorrow, NFL starts tomorrow. Week 1, game 1, obviously with our Detroit Lions going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. We are assuming there's going to be no Chris Jones. Travis Kelce is up in the air. Even if he plays, it's probably going to be limited. What do you expect to happen in that first game of the season, Lions going into Arrowhead?
I expect an exciting shootout, honestly, and I'm I guess a little surprised to see the line this big right now. I mean, the Lions being underdog. I get they're traveling. I get it's still Patrick Mahomes, right? But it's still looking like it's a touchdown right now, and it feels like it would be a massive surprise if Kelce plays. I think the general public is not aware of just how good Chris Jones is and how important he is for the middle of that defense and how he is pretty much unblockable when rushing the passer, but also a guy that completely alters how you run the ball. So that's the number one thing I'm curious about. If the Lions are going to hang around and make this thing really interesting, which I think they will, I think maybe it's not the sexiest thing, but how about David Montgomery rushing in between the tackles? I really think that's an element that can kind of be the cherry on top of this Lions offense because they have a good line. We know that they can throw to Jahmyr Gibbs and get the rookie involved. We know Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to command a ton of targets. They have no problem throwing the ball and protecting Jared Goff, but obviously having that inside run game to sustain drives and keep Patrick Mahomes off the field is the biggest thing. Now, I'm not going to get all crazy and bet against the Chiefs because I would take Mahomes against anybody like any logical NFL watcher would at this point. Mm-hmm. But I think the Lions are going to make this a lot more interesting than many people realize, and then the line indicates.
I agree with you, and I guess to tap into your fantasy bag a little bit more, you just mentioned David Montgomery. Who do you expect, I guess, to carry the bulk of this offense throughout the year, or I guess fantasy expectations for both those guys, Montgomery and Gibbs?
I think it always depends on your league settings, right? But let's just go with that. A lot of people are playing in PPR, and that means they both have value, and that means they both can easily finish as top 20 running backs in fantasy, which is really, really hard for players to do that are on the same team. You're always trying to shake up who will break out, who will handle the bulk of the workload of the backfield. But the Lions are a rare exception. It's kind of the Lions. I look at the Jets as maybe the same way, where you'll be able to roster one of their 2 starting running backs and feel comfortable because the role is differentiated enough. With Gibbs, you guys have heard this enough, right? He's a guy that can really probably kick out to the slot when you need, get him involved in the pass game. I look at when Alvin Kamara was at his best in the Saints passing attack. That's how Gibbs should be used right away at the NFL level. And then Montgomery's a completely different element. I mean, they had Jamal Williams last year, and obviously he had a lot of success, especially punching the ball in. Montgomery's going to be able to do that too. I think when you're looking at running backs that might not be workhorse backs but are still really valuable in fantasy, you want to take the guys that are in good offenses where they'll get touchdown equity. And when you look at the Lions, they're going to be able to get down the ball get down the field in between the 20s by throwing to Amon-Ra St. Brown, maybe throwing to Jahmyr Gibbs. I hope they get Sam Laporta involved as well. And that's going to be a lot of opportunity for Montgomery to finish runs, especially behind a pretty good offensive line. So they're the rare backfield. There's only maybe a handful in the league that both guys will have a real big impact across fantasy.
Yeah, I guess speaking of rarity, too, statistically, Jahmyr Gibbs was on ESPN, and he mentioned the high hopes of reaching that 1,000-yard rushing and 500 receiving. Is that realistic in your eyes?
I don't know about the rushing, and I don't know if I want that from him, right? I actually would like to see the receiving, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, even a higher capacity. I think that's maybe too low of a bar. I think Gibbs is a guy that can give you 650 yards through the air, and this is a young offensive coordinator that really understands how to get the ball in his playmakers' hands. He understands spacing and how to scheme guys open, and that's Gibbs. Just because he has the running back designation doesn't mean that he's going to be static behind the quarterback or next to the quarterback out of shotgun. You can really move him around the formation. I think the Lions will be one of those teams pre-snap that do a lot of that with him. So I would up the bar he set on the receiving, but I would lower it on rushing because at his frame and his rookie season, I don't know how many times I want to just turn around and hand him the ball. I love the change of pace on outside runs, but you went out and got David Montgomery because you want the comfort of handing him the ball 15 to maybe 18 times a game, and a lot of that up the middle. So and the Lions are a team, once again, they know how to use the extension of the run game, screens, jet sweeps, a lot of creative ways where it's kind of like a run play, but you're still technically throwing it in the stat sheet. So I like Gibbs' confidence, but I think he's got the numbers just a little bit off.
I would agree with that. I think he's going to be a little higher in the receiving yards than he will in the rushing yards. And a part of that is because they're going to be without their second best weapon on the outside in Jamison Williams for the first 6 weeks of the season. Coming from your perspective of who or how much will that be a detriment to them, not only in this game but going forward? And who do you think of as a fantasy option for the Lions receivers outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Right. It's so fascinating with him because he's somebody that alters the game even when he's not being targeted. And I kind of looked at this the way the Giants just took Jalen Hyatt. The Giants are one of those teams that had nobody that scared you, and you need to put somebody on the field that can open up and lighten the boxes for Saquon Barkley. And I think similar to that, although in a much higher capacity, because I think Jamison Williams is a more talented player than Jalen Hyatt, is the fact that when he's on the field, you really need to understand that you might have to allocate help. It depends what you're asking your corner to do, but you're not just going to load up the box and leave your corner out on an island and say, hey, go run down the field with Jamison Williams. Good luck, especially with Jared Goff's accuracy down the field as well at times. When Goff is kept upright, Goff can deliver the ball, and that would be a really exciting thing to watch when Jamison's done with this suspension. So it's going to be interesting to see how not just the target production. I mean, to answer that question, they are going to feed Amon-Ra St. Brown a ton of targets. I think you get a bump from Sam Laporta. You get a bump in the receiving game for both running backs. I don't really necessarily think there's another receiver on the Lions that I'm chasing, thinking, wow, all Jamison Williams' production now goes to this guy, because he's in such a unique role with his speed that it's really, really hard to replicate that. So I think when he's back, it's going to be exciting to see what it does for everybody else. But in the meantime, they just kind of have to scheme without him.
Now, publicly, there's been conversations had, because I know your boy Trevor's a big Tampa Bay fan. He may be in the loop or not. That's why I text you about the Mike Evans stuff. But is there any update on that? Because here in Detroit specifically, Aqib Talib hit the Up and Adams show, and he recommended Detroit as a trade spot for Mike Evans. And we got local content creators here going crazy with that storyline. Is there any talks in your circles of that being a realistic possibility?
It's such a weird one, right, guys? Because you have what I would call a legacy player. There are times where teams, notably ownership, they want a player to finish out their career with the organization because it keeps people in the seats. It keeps their stats in those record books. I mean, if Mike Evans ever went to the Hall of Fame, right, I mean, he would obviously go in as a Buck. Nobody's denying that. But that whole record of him having 1,000-yard seasons consecutively, that might mean more to the organization than, for them just saying, hey, we got to get a third-round pick that could become a 2 back for Mike Evans. They might not be looking at it that way. Now, I'll say this, if they come out of the gate and Baker Mayfield looks like what we've largely seen from Baker Mayfield in recent seasons, maybe that attitude changes, because at some point you need to turn things over and rebuild and get assets. And the Bucs are a team that I can confidently say I don't think Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield is the quarterback of the next 5 to 7 years. I think that guy probably lies within this draft class, one that looks pretty deep, by the way. So I would be going out to get those assets. But right now it seems like they aren't really hell-bent on doing that. Maybe if these contract talks just get kind of ugly, they have no other option but to try to get an asset back from Mike Evans, and you would think the Lions would be in the mix. I mean, why wouldn't the North be theirs this year, right? You have Minnesota, who's kind of hanging around. Green Bay's in a transition period. I still think they're a tough out, ironically. It kind of surprises me the odds makers have them significantly behind Chicago. I'm not really lining up with that one. But when you just look at talent on paper and time to go for it, this is what the Lions have been building for.
Yeah, and the last time we had you on, we talked about the Lions' new look secondary and what was going on there, and you said you needed to see it, meld a little bit. Obviously, a lot of new faces. You want to see how they play together, but it's weird to say that like this is a pretty good matchup for them because you've got Patrick Mahomes, who could be the best quarterback of all time on the other side, but we know the Chiefs' receiving core is lacking, and without his favorite target and their best pass catcher on the team, more than likely Travis Kelce not playing. Could you see the Lions secondary kind of getting out there and making some things happen against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs receivers?
I mean, you'd love them to do that, right? And that'll be up to the guys up front. That'll be up to what these pass rushers can do to get Mahomes on the move and get him to try to extend some plays, and that'll give more opportunity for the guys in the back end to make plays on the ball. Now, Mahomes is going to get his, and in large part that's because he's the greatest quarterback on the planet. The other part is I wonder what kind of skill talent, like level, you could drop off to that Andy Reid wouldn't find success with. I would love to actually see somebody try that in an alternate universe. But I think at the end of the day, it's a good time to get them, right? You're not going to have Chris Jones. You're obviously there. Kadarius Toney is always dealing with something, but this time notably, he's been out for weeks after weeks with the knee injury he suffered early in the summer. They're trying to figure things out. If Kelce can't go, which it seems like it would be a shock, and even if he did, he's not going to be 100%. They're trying to figure things out. They're trying to get Sky Moore involved in this offense. Like, those aren't guys that should necessarily scare you. Rashee Rice isn't going to be taking on a full snap load. He's probably not even going to play 60 to 70% of the snaps. So you want to get them early. And for the Lions, with they have some veterans in that secondary group as well. It doesn't feel like a matchup that should typically overwhelm them.
And Connor, before we let you go, first of all, we appreciate you being on the show and joining us, spending your time with us. I selfishly have a fantasy question about my own team, my big money league.
Does we waste the last question?
Dude, I need to know. All right, it's tomorrow.
So
I have Kadarius Toney on my bench. My 2 flex spots is just a standard PPR league. Right now, I got Juju and OBJ in there. Should I make the move and put Kadarius Toney in over one of those guys?
I couldn't do it. It just feels like with Toney, I get the highlights, but you're playing roulette, right? And it depends, of course, on who you're matched up with and what the projections are, because I think Juju and obviously OBJ, like, you're getting a floor with those guys. And, I mean, the floor is the basement with Toney. You could literally have a 0-point week. He could go off for 21 points. So it always goes week-by-week basis. If you're like, hey, I'm significantly overmatched this week. This guy has a ton of great matchups. He's projected to outscore me by 30 points. Let me try something. I don't mind that. But usually week 1 in fantasy, the projections are, maybe 2 to 8 points different. So my suggestion is don't overthink things until you're really, really desperate. It's week 1. You're not even close to desperate.
That's fair. And I'm projected to win right now, but the guy I'm playing does have Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback.
Sky Moore if you're doing anything. Connor, real quick, last time you were here, you called it. Jack Campbell to the Detroit Lions, and you and I were texting kind of back and forth during the draft. Between Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Brian Branch, and Sam Laporta, if you had to pick a rookie of the year for the Detroit Lions this year, who would you put your money on?
Oh, well, I might have already done that for Jack Campbell when the odds launched because it was just hilariously low. I can't even remember off the top of my head what it was, but it was one of those things where you're looking at it and you're thinking like plus 2,500 or something like that. How do you not sprinkle a couple bucks on that and laugh? And things change really quickly throughout the summer. It could take one training camp hype video. It could be the fact the guy's starting, whatever it may be. So I think Campbell was the value play. I think the guy that's chalk and has the best chance is obviously Gibbs because, listen, say Bijan misses a couple games and Gibbs doesn't, and Gibbs has this featured role that we're all expecting. I mean, he kind of has a really good runway besides Anthony Richardson, who doesn't have a lot of talent around him. So Campbell's the fun one because the odds were so ridiculous. Gibbs is definitely the chalky play if you're trying to go with a little bit of a safer pick.
Connor, man, I appreciate you joining us. Do you want to give out a shout to your shows when people can find your work?
Yeah, thank you, guys. The NFL Stock Exchange on PFF, we're covering the draft year-round. Of course, Fantasy Football Happy Hour for NBC. We're on Monday to Friday, 12 to 1 on Peacock, on Sirius Radio, on podcast format every single day. It's always good catching up with you guys. You guys have great energy, a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me.
Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you for joining us. Thanks for steering me away from Kadarius Toney because I was really itching for that.
No, I'm here to do that anytime. Later, guys.
Thanks,
see you, bro. Connor's the man.
Connor is the man.
Dude's
Love
good.
having him on. He's very knowledgeable, knows all this stuff. It's football season, man. Football season starts tomorrow. I'm so excited.